Have you ever wondered if God's goodness had quietly left your life the moment everything went wrong? Maybe you have felt that same quiet suspicion that grace ran out somewhere between one prayer and the next. There was a woman who buried her husband, buried both her sons, and walked back into her hometown with nothing but grief and an empty pair of hands. She had done nothing to deserve losing all three of them, and yet the losses kept coming, one after another. She believed, for a while, that God's hand had turned against her, that His goodness had simply passed her by. But in the middle of her emptiest season, goodness was already walking toward her, disguised as an ordinary field and an ordinary day. It rarely looks like a miracle at first glance. It looks like an ordinary morning, waiting patiently to be noticed. By the end of this sermon, you will see exactly how God's goodness follows you, even into the parts of your story that feel like famine. Watch closely today, because the same pattern that reached her in that quiet field is still repeating itself in yours. This is the story of Naomi and her daughter-in-law, Ruth, found in the book of Ruth, written during the time when judges ruled over Israel. It is a short book, only 4 chapters long, yet it holds one of the clearest pictures of God's goodness found anywhere in the Old Testament. A famine drove Naomi's family from Bethlehem to the foreign land of Moab, and it was there that she lost her husband and then both of her sons. In a matter of years, she lost the 3 men who had given her identity, provision, and any sense of a future. Ruth was a Moabite woman, an outsider with every reason to walk away, yet she chose to return to Bethlehem with Naomi instead of staying among her own people. Naomi even urged her to turn back and spare herself the hardship, but Ruth refused, choosing loyalty over comfort and safety. She had walked back into Bethlehem a widow twice over, with nothing left to bargain with, and no plan for what came next. When they arrived home with nothing, Naomi said this in Ruth chapter 2, verse 20, "Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead." Naomi had lost her husband, her sons, and her security, yet even in her grief, she recognized that the goodness of the Lord had never actually left. That single sentence, spoken in the middle of unbearable loss, is the whole message of this sermon in miniature. Here is the first truth this story teaches us. God's goodness does not wait for your circumstances to improve before it starts following you. Goodness is not a reward you earn once life gets easier. It is a person who was already moving before your circumstances ever changed. Naomi did not feel goodness in the burying of her husband, and she did not feel it in the burying of her sons. There was no visible reason for her to trust that anything good remained, and every ordinary measure said her story was over. From where she stood, it looked like God had turned His back, like the famine had won and heaven had gone quiet. That is exactly how famine works. It convinces you that silence from heaven means absence from heaven, and the two are never the same thing. But goodness does not always announce itself the moment it begins moving. Sometimes it moves silently, underneath the very grief you are carrying. The truth is, the same season that felt like abandonment was the season God was already positioning Ruth to walk beside Naomi. Nobody announced that plan to Naomi in advance. She simply woke up one more day and kept walking toward home. You may be in a season right now that feels like nothing but loss. A famine with no visible end. A grief with no visible purpose. If that describes you right now, you are not disqualified from this promise. You are exactly the person it was written for. And yet, the goodness of God does not require your permission, your understanding, or your feelings to keep moving on your behalf. It was already following Naomi through the loss of her husband, through the loss of both her sons, through every mile back to Bethlehem. Every mile of that road looked identical to grief, yet every mile was also quietly bringing her closer to restoration. It is already following you through the diagnosis, through the job that ended, through the relationship that did not survive. Goodness is not the absence of hardship, it is the presence of God, working underneath the hardship towards something you cannot yet see. You may not be able to trace exactly what God is doing underneath your hardship today, but that does not mean nothing is growing. This is the first shift you need to make today. Stop measuring God's goodness by how good your circumstances currently feel. Circumstances lie constantly. They tell you God has forgotten you the moment life gets difficult, but feelings were never meant to be your evidence. David understood this same truth when he wrote in Psalm 23 verse 6, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." That verse was not written by a man who had an easy life. David wrote it while running for his life from people who wanted him dead. Watch how this plays out in Ruth's own story, because what happens next in that field is not coincidence, it is goodness in motion. This is not a story about luck. It is a story about a God who moves specific people to specific places at specific moments. With nothing to their names, Ruth went out to gather leftover grain in the fields, the only provision available to the poorest in Israel. The law of Israel required landowners to leave the edges of their fields unharvested for exactly this reason, so the poor could gather what remained. Scripture tells us that Ruth happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, a relative of Naomi's late husband. Out of every field she could have wandered into that morning, this was the one already prepared for her. Of all the fields in Bethlehem, of all the rows of barley stretching across that land, her feet landed in exactly the right one. Boaz noticed her immediately and asked his servant, "Whose young woman is this, gleaning quietly among the sheaves?" It was such a small, ordinary question, the kind of thing anyone might ask in passing, yet it changed the entire direction of her story. He did not have to notice her. He did not have to speak to her, and he certainly did not have to show her any kindness at all. Kindness like that costs a landowner nothing to withhold. And yet Boaz chose to extend it anyway, without being asked. Yet Boaz told her to stay in his field, drink from his water, and instructed his men to deliberately leave extra grain behind for her to find. That kind of generosity was not required by the law. It went far beyond the minimum, straight into deliberate personal favor. What looked like an ordinary field on an ordinary day was actually the exact place goodness had already prepared for her to arrive. Ruth did not orchestrate that meeting. She did not plan her steps into that specific field. She simply obeyed and goodness met her there. All she did was keep showing up, one ordinary day at a time, and goodness did the rest of the work. This brings us to the second truth. God's goodness often shows up disguised as something painfully ordinary. If you are waiting for something dramatic to prove God is near, you may walk right past the very provision He already sent. It rarely arrives with trumpets. It rarely announces itself with a miracle you can point to and say, "That was clearly God." Most of the time, it looks far more like a field, a conversation, a small act of kindness you almost missed. For Ruth, it looked like a field she happened to wander into, a landowner who happened to notice her, a servant who happened to answer a simple question. Every one of those ordinary moments was actually the goodness of God, working through the smallest, most unremarkable details of an ordinary afternoon. God rarely needs a burning bush when He already has a harvest, a field, and people willing to show up in it. You have probably had moments like that too. Moments you brushed off as luck or coincidence or good timing. The phone call that came at exactly the right moment. The stranger who offered help you did not ask for. The door that opened without your engineering. None of those moments required a miracle in the traditional sense. They only required a God who was already quietly at work. What if those were never coincidences at all? What if those were the goodness of God, quietly disguised as your ordinary Tuesday? The goodness of God was never limited to Sundays or spectacular answers. It has always been available in the middle of your ordinary week. Ruth did not need a burning bush to know God was near. She needed a field, a harvest, and a man willing to show unearned kindness. The goodness of God does not need spectacular circumstances to move. It only needs your willingness to keep showing up in the field you have been given. Stop waiting for a miracle to prove God's goodness is real, and start noticing the ordinary provision that has been proving it all along. Now here is the third truth, and it is the one that changes everything. God's goodness does not stop at providing for today. It is one thing for goodness to feed you through a hard season. It is another thing entirely for it to rewrite your whole future. Boaz was not only a kind man in a field, he was what the law of Israel called a kinsman-redeemer, someone with the right to restore what was lost. That legal right meant Boaz could restore what the family had lost, including land, name, and the hope of continuing their line. Later, the women of Bethlehem said this to Naomi, recorded in Ruth chapter 4, verse 14. "Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman." By this point, everyone in Bethlehem could see what Naomi had refused to fully believe the day she walked home with nothing. Boaz would go on to redeem the family's land, marry Ruth, and give Naomi back a family line she thought had ended in a foreign grave. The woman who once said, "Call me bitter," because the Lord had dealt bitterly with her, now held a grandson in her arms. Their son, Obed, became the grandfather of David, and generations later, that same bloodline led to Jesus Christ himself. That single family line, redeemed out of famine and grief, became part of the ancestry of the Messiah himself. The goodness that met Ruth in an ordinary field did not just feed her for one season, it redeemed her entire story and became part of redeeming the world. What began as survival in a stranger's field ended as a thread woven directly into the story of salvation for the whole world. Whatever feels unfinished in your story right now, whatever feels too broken to be part of anything good, God's goodness is not done writing it yet. The same God who redeemed a Moabite widow's story is not intimidated by whatever feels unfinished or broken in yours. So here is what I want you to do today. Right where you are, in whatever field you find yourself standing in. Stop dismissing the ordinary provision in front of you as coincidence and start recognizing it for what it actually is, the goodness of God in motion. Look for the field you have already been placed in, the job, the relationship, the small kindness someone showed you this week that you almost overlooked. Thank God for it out loud today, because gratitude is how you train your eyes to keep seeing goodness the next time it shows up disguised. The more you thank Him for the goodness already in front of you, the more of it you will start to see. Let's bring this into prayer together, right now, wherever you are. There is no need for perfect words, only an honest heart willing to receive what has already been provided. Heavenly Father, thank you that your goodness never left me, even in the seasons that felt like famine, even when I could not see you moving. Forgive me for the seasons I mistook your silence for your absence, and for the goodness I walked past without noticing. Thank you for the ordinary fields you have placed me in, and for every provision I have been too distracted to notice as coming from your hand. Open my eyes today to the ordinary field you have already placed me in, and help me recognize your hand in it. I trust you to redeem what feels unfinished in my story, the same way you redeemed Ruth's, the same way you have never stopped redeeming mine. Thank you that my story is not too broken, too delayed, or too ordinary for your goodness to finish writing well. Surely goodness and mercy are following me all the days of my life. In Jesus' name, amen.